Hello, everyone. On behalf of the National Career Development Association, welcome to the NCDA webinar series. This session is titled Strategies for Effective Implementation of Career Interventions. I'm Melissa Venable, NCDA Director of Professional Development, and I've got just a couple of tips to share before we get the program started. During the webinar, please keep your microphones muted. We do encourage you to hold your questions until the end of the session. There will be time there for questions, and you may also use the chat if you'd like to. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our NCDA website and YouTube channel after the session, and I will email the link to all registered attendees. This program is approved for 1 hour of continuing education credit. For NCDA members, this will automatically be added to your record. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome today's speakers, Dr. James Sampson and Dr. Janet Lenz. Thank you all for being here.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we would like to start our webinar with a thanks to Melissa Venable for all of her support in getting this webinar going, and also to Melanie Reinersman, who helped a great deal with the creation of the monograph upon which this webinar is based, as well as the NCDA Publications Committee, which was chaired by Emily Bullock-Yowell, and our two excellent reviewers that we had that helped us to put the monograph together. So this has been a long-term effort over several years, and it's good to be able to share this information with professionals in the field. This model really, and the information we're going to share, has grown out of our professional experience in terms of designing career interventions, and then implementing those interventions, and then evaluating their effectiveness. So the things that we're going to be talking about today are things we've actually done. So we wanted to share what those experiences have been like, and our efforts to try to design a model to help people to avoid some of the obvious pitfalls and prevent some of the problems that can occur, as well as take full advantage of all of the potential for success that can occur. Just a quick recommendation on how to get the most out of this webinar. I'd suggest 3 steps. The first step is just listen to the webinar, the examples we share in this, and that becomes kind of the first overall advance organizer. Then these PowerPoint slides that we'll be sharing today, you'll have access to these PowerPoint slides. So the second thing I would do after you've listened to the webinar is always read through the PowerPoint slides, which provides, again, a more reinforced advanced organizer for the content in the actual monograph itself. And then you can then go for more detail by looking at the monograph. You can think of the monograph as almost a reference source where you can go deeper when you reach a particular point, like thinking about, well, how would I organize a pilot test of a new intervention? You would go to that particular part and look that up. So think of it as a reference document in that sense. So I think that's the way to get the most out of this webinar. So our goal really is just to really improve the effectiveness of career interventions by making their intervention more effective. So we see intervention as a key leverage point for making the whole career intervention better and more effective in serving the clients. So if we can make the intervention process better, we make the intervention itself better. We mentioned the monograph several times. This is it. It's just came out last year. This is it, available from NCDA. And you've heard us talk about intervention several times. And so what is an intervention? We have a definition here of what an intervention is, and it really involves the delivery of career resources and services, helping people make various types of decisions, occupational decisions, educational training, and employment decisions. And these career resources include things that all of us are really familiar with: assessments, information, instructional resources, the services. Could be either self-help or the brief or intensive interventions that we deliver face-to-face or at a distance. One of the reasons why I like using the word intervention applied to career is because it lines us up with what we've learned about all types of other interventions. For example, educational interventions and healthcare interventions. It turns out if we help prepare people for what we're going to provide for them, it's more effective. And that's in healthcare and education. So it's trying to use some of those same ideas that we've learned in other fields, improves effectiveness. We want to bring those into the career area as well. So that's why we're trying to focus on intervention to draw in that additional knowledge base. So the question becomes that we've gotten asked sometimes is, when do we need to really think about using an implementation model? When is it really necessary? Well, we think there are 7 of these particular kind of benchmarks for when you would want to use an implementation model. And one of those is when the intervention you're using is really getting more complex. I think back to when ONET first came out, was a lot of work put into that. It's an enormous resource, and with lots of information, new assessments, all types of links built into it to other resources, really complicated resource. Well, something like that benefits from an implementation model because of its complexity. Also, when we get new changes in the delivery mechanism, all of us, I think, were struggling in career services with distance delivery as a result of COVID. When we made that switch to offering services at a difference, we scrambled to try to figure out how to do that effectively. Well, an implementation model is really helpful in getting us started, organizing our thinking about how do we offer distance services effectively. Other things like when technology changes, like social media, we figure out how to make effective use of social media, or when we end up with new types of clients that we serve, or when we have new partners, new collaborating partners that we haven't really dealt with before, with new organizational cultures of their own. How do we mesh with those people? One example would be when career centers work more closely with academic advising. Other things, obviously, when standards change, professional standards, or when institutional policies change. We had fairly extensive changes here in our own institution when some of our accountability requirements changed for the kind of outcomes that we were data that we were providing.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about some other tools that may be useful as you think about career interventions and improving career interventions. And one of the things we want to stress through all of this is it's scalable to your environment. This is a lot. It is a comprehensive model, and there may be bits and pieces of it that prove useful to you. So we just want to stress that throughout, because it could be easy, like, this is a lot, this would overwhelm my 2-person office or something like that. But we think there are elements that everybody can take away. And I'm going to say a little bit more about career theory and how that might be a useful tool in this. But beyond that is the extent to which you have access to research information about whatever might be relevant to your intervention. If you're at a community college and you're tracking on the labor market to plan a career intervention to help young people understand the demands of the local market, or you have a particular type, maybe you're serving first generation college students and you want to figure out what does the research say about how to best reach first generation college students and help them with their career decision making and career resilience and adaptability. So whatever unique data from research at the institution you're at, the setting you're in, that you can access either through where you work or through the larger resources that are available to all of us now through electronic means. And of course, regardless of your setting, there may be unique standards that you're operating with, certainly the NCDA standards, the larger standards of some of our other counseling organizations, as well as the public policy that it might inform the work you do. So let's say maybe you're working with individuals transitioning out of the correctional system, and there are specific policies around the priorities for how to best serve them in re-entering the job market. So having these three things in mind and thinking about how you can access these may be important in the interventions that you're trying to implement. In terms of career theory and career interventions, embracing career theory can sometimes be a challenge. There are some career theories that maybe are more accessible to you than others. But one of the roles of career theory is to give you some guidelines for how to intervene with particular individuals, what things are important to consider. And within that career theory, they may emphasize self-knowledge, or they may emphasize of how people learn about occupations, or they may emphasize career adaptability. So finding a theory that you like and that works for you. Two of the ones we've used here at Florida State a lot, and all of our career interventions are cognitive information processing theory, RESEC theory. But you may have others that appeal to you. And with any good career theory, there are constructs that inform that theory. So as I mentioned, if career adaptability within career construction theory, maybe that's something you want to impact through a career intervention. Or if in Holland's theory, vocational identity, and you want to help young people increase their vocational identity level. So thinking through those constructs within the theory that you identify with, maybe career decision-making, self-efficacy, and thinking about, I'm going to try to impact that through an intervention. And of course, most career theories have particular assessments that can help you accomplish your career intervention. For instance, Holland's theory and self-directed search can help young people and adults and college students increase their self-knowledge and their option knowledge. So you may pull particular assessment tools from career theories that serve your population based on what you know about what they need. So in CIP theory, for instance, we use a model that includes the following items up there in the first bullet. And the Kasabi cycle is one type of decision-making model. And so we could, as part of our mission, say we want to improve students' knowledge of career decision-making, a career decision-making process, and they understand the components of career decision-making. Or for instance, how they're thinking about their career decisions. The term we use for that is metacognitions. So we can design an intervention that impacts those items that make up core elements of CIP theory. We can also, through various what we call readiness assessment tools, look at a person's level of career decision-making, their anxiety about decision-making, their confusion about decision-making, their lack of clarity or confidence. And we can say, I'm going to assess that, and then I'm going to design an intervention that will impact that. Another element that we've recently incorporated based on the work of Stephen Brown and his colleagues is the notion of critical ingredients and what comprises an effective career intervention. And Steve Brown and his colleagues have identified these items, and they include information and modeling and support and assessments. And building those in as part of your intervention design can have a powerful impact, as shown through multiple research studies about what works in terms of career interventions. In terms of Holland's theory, if you're familiar with it, he and his colleagues, a variety of tools from the My Vocational Situation to the self-directed search to career attitudes and strategies inventory, and many others that you can say, I'm going to use these tools within Holland's theory to increase their knowledge about the schema around the world of work, how to think about occupational alternatives, how to increase my self-knowledge, and as I mentioned, vocational identity. So you may choose as part of your design to incorporate some elements of Holland's theory as a way to document the impact of the intervention that you've created. Now, as I noted, there are many other theories that are out there that you might draw from, and it really is considering who are you working with, the nature of the setting, maybe policies, the nature of the staff that you have there, and what their backgrounds are. And for some of these things, obviously, there's a cost. There can be a cost in using the assessments. There may be a cost in some of the other tools that you're going to include. It also is perfectly reasonable to think that you might draw from a couple of theories. Maybe you want to incorporate social cognitive career theory and the notion of career decision-making self-efficacy as it's something you will impact. And then from career construction theory, you want to look at career adaptability and whether students, for instance, change in that through your intervention. So you can be creative about that. And there are many excellent resources, many of which we highlight in the handbook, that will help you understand some of these things and where you can get more information on them. Now, there is a critical element it can be in designing and implementing career interventions, but also critical elements for lots of reasons are the evaluation and accountability pieces. And we talk about this in the handbook. And, you know, nowadays it just is sort of a critical aspect of anything you do to say, what did you do and did it work? And did it actually create change for the person? And part of it is also, if we're going to spend the time and money to do this and implement this, let's have some evidence that it actually works. And also, if you're going to keep doing it, then how do we make it better through the information we gain in the evaluation process? So you may have heard these two terms. They've been in the evaluation literature for many, many years. The summative one, I think, is the most common one. It's kind of, you get to the end and you said, our goal is to increase, you know, students' career decision-making to self-efficacy, and you look at that at the end of your intervention. But an important one is the notion of formative. And if you've looked at this in the past, the way we talk about it in this model is along the way, you do some quick checks on what you're doing before you invest heavily in the time and the resources and the final intervention. You're doing some brief check-ins either with the clients, with the staff, in terms of the tool you're using. If you're using, let's say, a computer-based guidance system in your intervention, maybe you do a quick check on how your plan for students to use that is going, and the instructions they're giving and how staff works with them to see if it's actually working the way you intended and whether any tweaks are needed along the way. So these are important concepts to think about. Do you want to jump in?
So this relates to, and when we get to the model, we'll see in step 2 where we're actually creating these interventions. Let's assume that we're creating a new intervention that relates to a specific resource. Janet mentioned having interventions for corrections populations. Let's assume that we're creating a new group to serve people who are making transitions out of corrections into living obviously independently. And we're using an assessment to be able to do that, to help them gain self-knowledge and options knowledge and so forth. And so it's literally the formative evaluation is just saying, how is this group working? You know, do people like it? Is it achieving the outcomes that we want? So we were laughing as we were talking about getting ready for this, about not overthinking this part.
Right.
This keep it simple is really the key to formative evaluation. Quick, easy to understand. It's just checking to make sure it's working as you intended to have it work.
Right. And that goes to the whole notion of scalability, that you may try whatever you're planning, as he said, like an intervention for persons transitioning from a correctional setting or community college students transitioning to a 4-year institution. and you do something with a small group and you check it out, and then maybe you scale it up to a larger size population. So you'll see this next slide. It talks about, well, how do you get this information? Where do you get this information? Again, our former director here used to talk about minimal to maximal in terms of what you do in terms of evaluation. And I used to chair the research and evaluation committee here in the Career Center. And we just like think small goals. So like you'll see the first one there. Maybe you do something as simple as, you do a quick check on where they are in their career decision-making status. One of our colleagues has developed a decision-making measure using our Kasabi cycle. And midway you could do a check. Is this helping, or are they confused? What do I need to tweak? Simple questions that ask, like, what do you think about this? What's working? What's not? What do you like? What don't you like? Also, the second and third one up there, getting together a few folks and just asking some targeted questions about that. Maybe when we did this, we provided food, and we did it in a campus lab in the business college where they actually do marketing focus groups. So they were kind enough to loan their space. So food is always good to get them in to talk about this. And maybe you just are able to do some observations about whether students are on task, whether they're actually completing the activities, and what would make it more interesting or flow better or more understandable to the group. So
that last point is really important, is observations, because sometimes we think an intervention is working a particular way and it's not. But when we actually watch people do the intervention, we watch them use the information, it's not working out quite the way we thought. And by asking simple questions like, what's your experience with this? And are you finding the information you need? And they say, well, that wasn't what I expected.
Yeah.
And then you realize the way that we prepared them for using the information wasn't really what we needed to be doing. And I'll also say that one of the other steps in the model is all these feedback loops that you'll see, that once we do these evaluations, whether it's formative or summative, it gets fed back in, and sometimes we go back and we fine tune an intervention based on the evaluation data.
And certainly hand in hand, evaluation, accountability basically go together. And this is where you're thinking about external groups, stakeholders that are saying, like, are we making good use of the funds we have in terms of what we're delivering? And this model has been part of our work for many years, DPPOO. So, and these are fancy terms for things that you're already familiar with. So did you figure out what the group that you're serving, what did they need? And that's diagnosis is simply needs assessment, another term. The prescription part is just the plan for what you're going to do. Did you choose interventions that speak to what you learned from those measures that you did in terms of identifying how do we best intervene with this population? And there are lots of ways you can document that you actually did what you're going to say you did, like staff reports, observations, the actual materials that people completed. And then the measures that we talked about previously, you're saying, did they improve in decision making? Did they increase their self-knowledge? Whatever you were trying to impact by your career intervention, that's where your outputs come in. And the last one is the challenging one for our field, I think, in general, because it's longer term. It requires assessing beyond the immediate end of the event, their satisfaction with their job, maybe ex-offenders staying on the job, students, still employed several years out. I know a lot of people in higher ed, they talk about, well, we do follow-up like right at the end of their degree and then later on, but maybe we need, with today's generation, we need evidence 5 years out, 3 years out. That's just a challenging task to do when we're still dealing with students who are right in front of us or clients who are right in front of us to track on the people out there. But there are models for doing that, but I won't spend too much more time on that today so we can get to the model. But just know, similar to evaluation data. Much of the accountability data can be the things you're already doing for evaluation. And maybe you just make sure you've got, it's sort of, you know, the phrase nowadays is telling our story that we created this career intervention and we successfully delivered it, and there were positive outputs for the client population. And again, whatever is scalable and manageable in your setting in terms of collecting some data. And there are instruments that are easy to use, brief to use, free to use, and we can spend more time sharing information about that after this is over, if that would be helpful to you. But now I want to turn it back over to Dr. Sampson to get into more detail about the model.
So there's several really key assumptions about implementation. Having a plan helps staff members make best use of the limited time they have available for planning and evaluation. So organizing their time helps them to do a better job and to avoid wasting precious time. Because correcting a problem takes longer than the time invested that might have prevented the problem. And one of my favorite sayings is some planning is better than no planning at all. So if you only use part of the model, it's better than using none of the model. So just starting small and adding steps over time is perfectly fine. Implementation is an ongoing process. You can always do better with implementation. Oops. And we've gone backward. There we go. Another important point is that no two organizations will create the same implementation plan. Every plan will be different because each organization is different. So, and it's unlikely that every step of the model is going to be used. When you look at the model, it's easy to become overwhelmed, like, oh, there's a lot of steps in this. Well, you'll pick which steps are relevant to your particular organization. And it goes back to the scalability point that Janet mentioned before. You know, it can be used in a large organization, a small organization. It can be used with all the steps. It can be used with just some of the steps. Because no plan can really anticipate all of the relevant aspects of implementation that need attention. There's information here about the validity of the model. We took some care to establish the validity of the model to make sure that it was working, and that's here, and it's also, of course, in the monograph itself. The way the model works, it begins with a step-by-step graphic, and then a written description of key aspects of each step, and then a final slide shows everything all wrapped together. And so we're going to start with our first step here, which is evaluating current career interventions. How do you know where to go if you don't know where you're starting? Is essentially what we're saying here. And so that's the first step in the process before we start implementing an intervention, is to evaluate where we are. And first thing to do, just get organized. Janet mentioned a needs assessment for clients. So this is an overall needs assessment of all the clients that are served. And then there's a question of evaluate current career interventions. Well, now you see the connection between the model and what Janet was talking about before. If you keep up with a regular evaluation of what you're doing, you use that in the implementation process because you know how well your interventions are working. Then you'll prepare to get ready for implementation. I've used this model in a wide variety of organizations, some small, some large, countrywide sort of things. And this step really helps where everybody figures out who's doing what at what time and so forth. This last step here, you'll notice gets repeated over and over and over and over again. It's the one step that's common to all of the 8 steps in the implementation model, and that's communication with staff. This next step here is this select, adapt, revise, and develop improved career interventions. And the select, adapt, revise, and develop us the 4 things that we can do. We either pick an intervention that already exists, we adapt something that already exists, we revise something we're already doing, or we create something new. And there's a preparation step. We do the actual improvement work. Now we bring in this formative evaluation that Janet talked about. But then we think about how can we collaborate with other organizations, like academic advising and so forth. And of course, the communication with everyone to keep everyone up to date so no one feels left out of the process. 2 things here. This integration with career interventions. This is really important. This is a step that I think is really left out of most implementation models. And it's people forget to think about how does the new thing we're going to do affect the existing things we already do? What are we going to stop doing and do again? And I want to draw your attention to that little feedback arrow on the left-hand side, because what happens sometimes as we begin to think about how does this fit with things we're already doing, we realize, oops, what we designed is not quite correct because it conflicts with something we already do. That's why that little arrow goes back, and we go back and we make a few changes based on that. And then we go back and we look at it once again. So again, you're beginning to see some pattern here. There's a preparation step. We do something like the integration. Now we're going to look at some strategies for summative evaluation and accountability. This is where those get planned early on for this. And then we're going to look at how well we're doing in these integration process. What is the group thing with this? And then we're going to look at pilot sites. Now, pilot sites in a large organization, we're going to pick particular parts of the organization where the intervention is going to be tried. If you're in a single career organization, then there's no pilot site, it's the entire organization. So it may be just 2 staff members agree to say, okay, we're going to try this out in a group and we'll see how this works. And then we're going to begin to look at the marketing of interventions to target audiences, because it's no good if you put all an effort in something and no one knows about it.
Well, I'll also say we developed an e-portfolio here many years ago, and you definitely want that data from the tryout before you do the big marketing splash. So we spent a lot of time making there are no bugs, that's ready to roll out, that we've got all the information we need to explain it to people and to our partners on campus. So the marketing is, it's not about just getting people to use it, it's making sure you don't like wave all the flag and say, come try this, and it's not ready for prime time. That's
not working. And communication is always. Then we're going to train people in either the pilot site or people who are doing the pilot testing. We're going to plan that training. We're going to provide that training, formative evaluation of how well is this staff training working. Are we training on the right content, the right way? And we'll communicate our progress with people. We then, after we've trained the staff, we'll actually do the pilot testing. Conduct a pilot test, evaluate our progress, work on our marketing and our communication to staff. Then we move on. We're broadening out to train all staff members, especially if it's a large organization, If it's a small organization, then this may have already occurred in a prior step where training staff at the pilot sites, that might have been everyone when it was a really small career service. This gives you an example of how the model gets modified depending on what your needs are. So we make changes in the staff training if we need to, conduct it, do marketing, and communicate our progress.
And I would say, depending on, like, we're in a large career center with distinct units, you may decide, I mean, sometimes the staff training, like we've implemented more, career management systems than I can remember. Sometimes it involved everybody, sometimes it involved just the employee relations staff. So in your particular setting, it's kind of, or you may say, who wants to be part of this versus who must go through the staff training, and just making some decisions about that fit your organization.
Yeah, there's some material in the monograph itself about specialized training for people who have a type of work that only they have the specialized training for versus the kind of training that's needed for all staff. For us, I think critiquing a resume, we expect everybody can critique a resume, would be something that all staff would want to be trained in. Then it comes to delivering these career interventions, and we continue with our marketing, communicate our progress, and then we conduct these evaluation and accountability tests. And of course, that would be summative evaluation at this point, as well as the accountability tasks that we have talked about. We're going to collect our data and disseminate it and communicate with everyone, showing the progress that we have made. And that's the complete model, and it shows all of the feedback loops. You can see where at various steps, you may need to go back and rethink something. And that's where you really fine tune an idea, where you really get the kinks out and improve things. We know this a lot in other aspects of our life, in manufacturing in this country, where you really have to go back and make adjustments. And this allows for these adjustments, the little fine tuning that makes these interventions really super effective. So I want to switch gears here just a little bit and just look at what are some of the factors that influence implementation success, and then we're going to have some time for questions and answers. This comes from experiences that we've had naturally using the implementation model. And we find there's three things that really influence success. It's the nature of the organization, implementing change, and cultural and national factors. The number one factor in the success of implementing any change, no matter what it is staff participation in decision-making. And there's a very, very famous quote on this, and it's as follows: people support what they help create. And that is just so true, that when people have no say in what happens, they get anxious because they're afraid of failing, they're afraid of looking bad. And so having staff participate in decision-making, although it takes a little bit more time, what you're doing is you're building support for the intervention and for its success. Knowing that implementation is an ongoing process. Things change, organizations change, and you have to fine-tune things. And having an attitude of cautious optimism and persistence. Those are the two attitudinal things that are most important. Cautious optimism. I think this is going to be good, but I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to look at the formative data, I'm going to look at the summative data, and we'll change it if it needs it. But I think this is going to be a better way of doing this. And persisting when things don't always work out when you think so. And the kind of language that we use is really, really important. I hate the use of the words fix and correct. We got to fix this. This has got to be corrected. Because it implies that the staff has been making a lot of mistakes and there's something wrong with what we're doing. Or if we just change those words a little bit, we're saying virtually almost the same thing, but it's in a way that people can accept so much easier. We say we need to enhance what we're doing, and let's improve what we're doing, because it says we're doing good things, we're just going to make them better. That can help staff to be so much more supportive of change in the organization. Consistent leadership is so important. Having the director change in the middle of a major implementation process makes things really difficult. Having consistent leadership over time is really key to implementation success. Making sure there's enough time and effort for implementation, realizing this is probably going to take a little longer than we initially think, and that we have enough people to help get enough effort to get this really done.
And I would just say, putting that down on paper and I used to teach a program design and evaluation class, and they had to do a grant proposal, and they had to show over a 1-year period what's going to happen when and who's responsible. That's pretty basic program design and evaluation. And you may have actual other systems you use for that, but putting that down in some system or in black and white on a piece of paper, and kind of, this is our best guess about when we can get this done. And then through your formative evaluation, tweaking that as needed, and not, you know, the old saying, everything takes longer than you think it's going to take. And that certainly applies to career intervention implementation as well.
That's so true. There's such power in writing things down and everyone agreeing on that, and being clear just about what it is we're doing, who's doing what, and so forth. The last of these three factors contributing to change is addressing staff resistance to change. Not all resistance to change is bad, because sometimes we come up with ideas that aren't good, and we need to put the brakes on and say, well, wait a minute, if we stop doing this and do this instead, what will happen to these good outcomes we've achieved all these years? This new approach won't address those outcomes. Someone needs to say that. You know, it's looking at recognizing the elephant that is in the room, making sure we've done a good job of staff training. Staff members don't like to be incompetent. They don't like to be embarrassed when they can't answer a student's question, and being willing to repeat steps in the process, knowing that this fine-tuning really needs to take place. There are some cultural and national differences. There are variation in cultures in decision-making, like the role of the senior manager. In some places, there's a lot of decision-making power that's given to staff. In other places, no one makes a decision except for the senior staff manager. So if that's the case, then you have to work within that environment. There are, however, a lot of similarities, because it's a sequence of events. No matter who makes the decision, one thing precedes another thing, which precedes another thing. You have to do things in a certain sequence to get them to work right. And those are the similarities that we can count on, and that's embedded in this 8-step model. So creating an implementation plan to make informed and careful decisions is relevant regardless of who's doing the decision making. And in the model, as we've said, is flexible enough. You can change it, you can adapt it, that these national and cultural differences can be accommodated in the 8-step model. A couple of just final thoughts before we take time for questions. And one is that it's becoming increasingly clear that collaborative partnerships are important for funding career interventions. Our funding is getting more difficult to get. More questions are being asked about, well, what are the outcomes of what are we getting for the money that we're spending on this? Boards are asking questions like that, supervisory boards. And so having data that speaks to that is really important. But having collaborative partnerships where you've teamed with other organizations who are serving people that you are serving just helps your building support for the funding that you have. So maintaining funding is about really showing outcomes, but also about these collaborative partnerships. And so managing these collaborative partnerships is increasingly important. The implementation model, it has specific places where the collaborative partnerships are mentioned, where you meet with people, you talk about shared interests and so forth. We mentioned change is not always good. Good intervention should not be replaced just because something new is available. We have this terrible tendency to like new shiny things. And sometimes we replace good things with things that are not good just because somebody somewhere saw this at a conference and thought this would be spectacular to have one of these as well. We need to be good critical thinkers about this. We know the research shows that senior manager support is absolutely critical. We need to build support from senior managers. If they're not behind this, our chances of success is a lot less, as is staff participation in the decision. We know that is crucial for our success in implementation. Leadership, planning, collaboration, training, and evaluation, you know, those 5 elements there are really essential to implementation success.
I would just add, you know, and you may know this from your own setting, the thought that you're going to do this and be in charge of it, it may not always emanate from your particular shop or setting. And we had a situation where on high, like the president said, we need an e-portfolio, but having this implementation model gave us the benchmarks for saying, all right, the president has said we need to do this and we need to do it quick, but we will pay attention to these things, the marketing, the tryout, the building support on campus. So it's still relevant, even though it didn't emanate from those of us who were in charge of career intervention. So that's just, sometimes things happen in a hurry because someone in charge higher up the food chain in an institution wants it, but this can still help inform your work along the way.
So take advantage of opportunity,
Yes.
but have a plan,
Yes.
a structure for
Right.
then saying, okay, here's an opportunity.
Yes.
Let's work our way through this.
Because it brought money and staff our way too. So
Yes.
yeah, that's another reason for sort of moving along with it, even though it didn't initiate with you.
So these are the actual references with links that you'll see in your in the PowerPoint for this presentation, and this relates to what Melissa said about the Learning Hub course that exists for this. There is a 1 CEU credit for this webinar, but there's also a course now that exists that we're just about ready to go live with, where you get the monograph itself, and you'll take questions, I think 20 questions at the end of reading the monograph, and then you get 3 CEUs for that. So you could get a total of 4 CEUs for relating to implementation for this. But let's see what sort of questions you have, and Melissa, whatever questions you may have noted as well.
Thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Sampson, Dr. Lenz. This has been really helpful, informative. Anyone have any questions? Now would be a great time. You could raise your hand or type them into the chat.
I'll just say while we're waiting on any questions, in addition to our handbook, NCDA has a number of resources that relate to this topic. So if you're looking for particular career assessments to use as part of your career intervention, their guide to career assessments is an excellent tool. In addition, a number of years ago, Dr. Julia Pankey-Makula and Gail Rooney wrote a monograph on managing, assessing learning outcomes, and it's a very practical, useful guide. In addition, while they're somewhat from previous years, the National Career Development Guidelines still provide some useful outcomes you might want to consider measuring as part of your career intervention. And of course, the National Association of Colleges and Employers provides some standards and guidelines to use in evaluating your career services. So those are just some additional resources beyond our handbook that you might think about using.
And I'd also like to just announce that this course on the NCDA Hub is now live as of very, very recently. So if you'd like to check out earning CEUs for reading the monograph, you could check it out at this link on the screen or contact me as well. So we do have a comment in the chat from Michelle. Thanks for emphasizing the data piece of needs and evaluation. That really is the only thing upper administration seems to listen to. We do know that so many of us are required and compelled to capture data to share in reports with proposals and things.
I hear you, Michelle, on that. And I would say, you know, it can be a challenge for some career services offices. I mean, we're fortunate to have a full-time person in charge of assessment, but you can do it. We had it, as I said, we had a team, a committee of people, and it was volunteer, like who wants to work on this? And we did small things and then bigger things, and they were across units. We did an evaluation with employer relations on employers' attitudes toward critical thinking, but we also worked with institutional research, certainly on some of our engagement and follow-up data. So looking for campus partners, and again, I'll mention Dr. Julia Pankey-Makala. She's part of an assessment group that has excellent resources. If you email me, I can help you find the website for that. But Michelle's absolutely right that this is part of our world now. And again, you can do minimal to maximal depending on the resources and time you have access to.
One thing to add about the monograph, it does have at the end of it has a series of appendices that include some additional materials that you might find helpful. One is that it has some training materials that you can use for staff that are built in, and as well as a series of checklists that help you manage the implementation process, that you can go through and see kind of where you are and what the next steps would be in the process.
And while we didn't put our emails up here, we're certainly available to answer. We're both retired, meaning we do this as unpaid, highly trained volunteers. But if you have specific questions and want to follow up with us, and we're happy to chat with you, and you can easily find us, I think, by Googling our names.
And it looks like Rick has a question.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm just curious, you know, if any recommendations you have for helping, you know, organizations, institutions to connect with, you know, this information to their leadership. You mentioned that, you know, it's the importance of having senior, you know, leadership be involved in that process. But it seems like many times, you know, even though this resource is out there, and again, thank you for providing it, such wonderful steps. And I'm just curious, though, of recommendations on trying to get this information to those that may not have that career development, career services background, and make sure that they understand the importance.
I think trying to think of local examples of challenges that you have faced where you've been trying to implement programs quickly, or you've been overwhelmed with information, and where having something that would organize the process would be helpful. That would lay out what the steps would be and what were the things that would to pay attention to. And the idea behind that I think many managers really resonate with is avoiding wasting time. Because it just annoys people, that we've wasted time on this process, and also the idea of focusing on collaboration and funding. In other words, the way we could build collaborative support in our organization for what we're trying to achieve, because that's a big part of the model, is building that kind of collaborative support. So it's really looking at it from the manager's point of view. What concerns does he or she have about this process, and making sure that time isn't wasted, that we've got some kind of guide to start with that is kind of shortens the process, makes things a little easier, not quite so overwhelming. A little bit like, peeling an onion, in layers, that we just don't need to do it all at once, just this little piece, and then we'll go to the next piece, and then the next piece.
Rick, can I ask what type of setting you're in? Are you talking about senior management in your immediate setting or beyond, let's say, your immediate setting?
Yeah, I can say, from my own institution, having difficulty explaining where interventions were necessary, and the funding issues, staffing issues, that's kind of what leadership has focused on, rather than what is necessary to help students find that intervention that can help them make that career choice. But I've also seen the same thing at other institutions, where decisions are made by someone in an organization's leadership to determine how they implement interventions that may not abide by any of the professional standards. Definitely nothing that's been mentioned in the monograph. So it's just interesting, because to me, I know that I've had my own difficulty with it, but I think others could find value in this, yet trying to get this information out to those that are making decisions at the institutions can be rather challenging.
I think focusing is when Janet was speaking about that accountability model and the outputs and outcomes. That's really what I think drives administrators. In other words, what difference are we making? And those are in that accountability model, you can think of the first 3 steps as how we get there. And the last 2 steps is where is where. Where are we landing? What is the destination? And it's the kind of what changes do we make in students' learning, and then ultimately what impact does that have on them? Then that, focusing with leadership on that, this is what we're trying to achieve with these interventions, is to do these things. They've shown where this occurs in other places. We have no reason to believe we can't do that here.
Yep, thank you.
Thank everyone for attending.
Yes.
And, you can see where you can get more information, and shout out to Melissa for all of her help again, and good wishes in your work, and hope this proves useful down the road.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Watch for an email following up the session, and have a great rest of the day.